Okay, well, welcome everybody to this Ocean Allies webinar on the business case for equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. We are very excited to have you all here with us today for this very unique webinar where we have not just one expert to share their insights with us, but four. To kick things off, I do want to share a little bit about Ocean Allies. So for those of you who have engaged with Ocean Allies before, welcome back. We're very happy to see you here in this webinar. And to those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. We're also very excited to have you joining us and to be part of our community. So Ocean Allies is a program that's dedicated to addressing critical challenges around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in Canada's ocean sector. So since our launch in 2020, we've partnered with organizations nationwide and evolved through several project iterations, with our focus always being on opening doors, sparking meaningful engagement, and building lasting support for a more diverse, inclusive, and innovative workforce in Canada's ocean economy. If you would like to stay connected with Ocean Allies after today's webinar, we do encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter or to follow us on LinkedIn, as these are our go-to channels for Ocean Allies updates, including details on the next webinar that we'll be hosting later this spring. Of course, if you ever want to reach out directly to Ocean Allies for any reason, we have the email address up on the screen. That's a direct line to us, so reach out anytime. Now, before I introduce our wonderful panelists and moderator today, I did have a few quick housekeeping notes. We are a very large group today, so everybody's automatically muted. If you can keep it that way during the panel and presentations, that would be amazing. After the panel and presentations, we will have an open floor Q&A session. So if you do have a question at that point that you want to ask outwardly, you can put up your Google hand and then come off of mute and speak your question to whoever you want to ask it to. Also, if you do have questions that come up throughout the presentation and panel, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will go through them once we're at the end of the panel. All right, and lastly, sorry, the session will be recorded and sent out to everyone who registered. We know not everybody who registered is going to be able to be here in the moment today, but we will send out a recording of this for afterwards for anyone who wants to take a look. Okay, now thank you again for joining us today. And with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce today's speakers who will be sharing all of their experience and expertise around the business case for EDI&A today. So up first is our keynote speaker, Dr. Kes Morton from Pisces RPM. Kes is an entrepreneur and interdisciplinary leader with a background spanning science, business, and management. She's a strong advocate for equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, and views inclusive practices as essential to driving innovation, strengthening collaboration, and enhancing the ocean industry. As the founder of Ocean Allies, Dr. Morton has played a leading role in advancing EDI&A in Canada's ocean sector. So welcome, Kes. Next up, our moderator is Karen Paul from Workforce Warriors. Karen is a dedicated educator and advocate for equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. With over 30 years of experience working alongside Indigenous communities in education, workforce development, and consulting. Her work is deeply rooted in promoting inclusive education and equitable employment opportunities, especially for Indigenous peoples across Canada. Karen's lifelong dedication to EDI&A is reflected in her mission to foster belonging, empower individuals, and drive community development, making her a transformational leader in inclusive practices and systemic change. Welcome, Karen, and thank you for moderating our panel today. Next up, we have Anne-Marie Pham from the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. Anne-Marie has a deep understanding of issues and opportunities related to diversity and inclusion and specializes in mobilizing, educating, and sharing the latest research and promising practices on EDI in the workplace. Anne-Marie brings a unique set of skills and perspectives, having worked as a diversity and inclusion lead for Spectra Energy and the City of Calgary, and as a trainer and facilitator for Human Resources and Skills Development Canada. She's provided dynamic presentations, training, and consulting services to clients from a wide range of industries in the business, public, and not-profit sectors for over 25 years. So welcome, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for being here. And last, but definitely not least, is Natasha Ali from Culture Ally. Natasha is a seasoned EDI leader and human rights lawyer called to the Ontario Bar in 2017, who transitioned from practicing law to advancing equity in organizations. She specializes in building sustainable EDI strategies, leading multi-year initiatives, and working with senior leaders to embed equity into policies, culture, and decision-making. With deep expertise in strategy development, project management, and stakeholder engagement, Natasha drives measurable, values-aligned change. Welcome, Natasha, and thank you also for being here. All right, so that is all of our amazing speakers. I'm going to now pass the torch over to Kes for her presentation on the business case for EDI&A.
Thank you, Natalie. And thanks as well to our panelists and to our attendees for joining today. I know there is never a dull moment in business or in the work that we're trying to do here. So one of the things that I like to bring to something like this is I like to learn a little bit about the people that are in the audience. And I know that can be a little bit harder when we're online like this. So I hope that you will brace yourselves and play along as I bring us to some Slidos, because that's fun for me, and fun is a core value for me at work. So one of the questions I love to start off with is, what hat are you wearing today? And when I say hat, I mean, how would you describe the roles that you're bringing to this conversation? So for me right now, one of the hats that I'm wearing is parent, because I got a sick kid like right over there. That's a big hat for me today. I'm also a founder. That is a thing that is in my life. I'm a scientist. I don't know. What else? How would I describe myself? Nerd, definitely. 100%. Weirdo, definitely. So those are the kind of hats that I'm wearing when I'm having this conversation. And I'll just give you guys a little bit of a chance here to poke in some hats. I find it really so helpful for people to share a little bit about where they're coming from, what perspectives they're bringing. It also, unfortunately for everyone here, I do have just enough teacher training to be dangerous. So Memorial University insisted that everybody that graduated with a PhD had some teacher training, and that is the last time I took any teacher training, so it's probably super outdated, but this is a little psychological adventure as well to make you think about things. Love it. So they're coming in fast and furious now. We got some business leaders, quite a few business leader hats wearing today. Teacher, team player, mother, DEI steward, learner, love that, instructional designer, CEO, writer, sister, friend, and ally, educator, colleague, friend. That's a good one. I like that one. Makes me feel good. Oh, look at that. So many good hats. HR and HR. I went out to Carboneer there and picked up an H. HR and HR business person, dog mom, cat mom. Yes, a couple of cats kicking around here. I just had to turn off my video to throw one of them in my office because they don't understand that this is not snuggle time. DEI advocate, dog walker, consultant, writer, L&D professional. I can't keep up with them all. Nature advocate, worker. I think there's a few that have been broken up here. Sometimes Slido does things to us. Okay, so I'm going to move us along. Thank you so much for playing along. We're going to get a little more serious, I'm afraid. Let's ask this question next. Do you think that diversity, equity, and inclusion are critical to a high-functioning team? All right, we're preaching to the choir today. This is a really helpful one for me as a presenter, so I'll make sure I pitch it not to convincing you, but hopefully giving you the tools to have this conversation with other people. And last but not least, do you have all the resources you need in order to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in your team? A little more variation on this one. Good, I love it. Okay. Well, for those of you that have all the resources you need, I hope that you'll share some of them with us when we get more to the conversation part of this. I'm going to share a few resources right now, but I was asked to speak about the business case for equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in the workforce. I find that fascinating as someone who, as said, nerd, love to read. There's a lot of discussion already. In the late 90s, there was a real big, let's move away from the business case for equity, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility. And now we're moving back to the business case. But that's where we are right now, which is perfectly fine. It's been long enough that people, I think, have kind of forgotten the business case, perhaps. So for me, it is honestly so obvious that we do need equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in the ocean sector, which is the nerddom that I live in. And the reason I say that is that I don't think anyone would disagree that we need more people. We definitely need more people in our industry. We need more productivity as a country, and we need more innovation. And I say that because unemployment rates have been falling and job vacancies are increasing in most regions in Canada, leading to labor shortages, not even getting into the idea that, very specific areas or very specific skills are certainly lacking. Second, and this is something that has been starting to hit the news a little bit lately, is the productivity that's happening in Canada right now. So productivity and export overall, Canada's business productivity has been falling over the last 5 years. And we have a trade deficit, which leads into my further point here, which is that we have to innovate. We have an economy in Canada that is built on a very traditional economy. We were and mostly still are a resource economy, but the world is changing and we have to change the way that we do work. And we also have volatile and rapidly changing markets. Like, this could not be more on point right now with the back and forth that we're having on how trade is changing globally right now. So we really do need the innovation in the ocean sector. And this probably applies to other sectors. I don't know things about other sectors, so this is all I'm going to talk about. So when we talk about people, one of the easiest ones to talk about is women in the workforce. So 47% of workers over 15 are women. So if you're not including women in your discussions, you're removing 47% of potential workers that you're talking about. 53% of university educated workers are women. The proportion of workers who are immigrants in Canada is expected to increase from 1 in 4 to 1 in 3.8. And a lot of these numbers are from CCDI. So just shout out there if you want like a really great PDF on the business case for equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, please go to their website. It's fantastic. People are retiring later, creating greater generational diversity in the workforce. The Indigenous identifying population in Canada is growing significantly faster than the non-Indigenous population. So again, these are just numbers. You're playing a numbers game as a business owner. These are workers that if you're not reaching out to, you're not going to have them in your workforce. And the proportion of people with disabilities in the workforce is increasing quite rapidly, to be totally honest. And again, that is an untapped labor market for a lot of industries, and particularly in the ocean sector, it's one that we're not seeing as much participation as we could. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. Productivity. So there has been a lot of research on productivity of diverse teams. They are 36% more likely to financially outperform less diverse teams. So straight up, why wouldn't you do this, honestly? Better strategy and implementation, enhanced collaboration and problem solving, improved decision-making, higher employee satisfaction, language diversity, and cultural understanding. That's one that I find so interesting when you think about exporting, because it's something that as a Canadian, when I was working abroad, I was often brought into meetings specifically because of my cultural understanding. And the same thing can work in bringing someone into a Canadian company. For example, right now, there's a lot of increased desire to export to Asia. I don't understand how business works in Asia. That's not anything I have any experience with, but someone who does have that background, has that cultural understanding, can be a huge asset to the productivity of your team. And then my last point, which is innovation, quite simply, this to me as a scientist, another one of those situations where if you have more information, which is the information that comes from people with different backgrounds that have unique perspectives and different ways of thinking, you get new ideas. It's just facts that if you have people with different information bringing to the table, looking at things from different perspectives, you will get more ideas. You will get new ideas. You will get different ideas. and especially when they start like working together and bringing those different perspectives. And there's a whole other layer to that, of course, which is creating a safe space for people to bring their background to the table. But quite simply, if you have a strong, diverse team where people feel safe, you will have more innovation. And those are just my quick slides when I was asked to say, why would we have the business case for innovation? And as said, to me, it is so very, very obvious, as I'm sure it is to many people on the panel and in the room today. So I hope that this information is helpful to you moving forward, and I look forward to our panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kes, for that, and thank you for the interactive Slido. Being a teacher and a geek myself, I really enjoyed that. I guess I do have a question I'd like to pose to you first to get the panel started. The ocean sector has been slower to adopt EDI principles compared to other industries. Why do you think that is, and what needs to change? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I think it's a public perception of what the ocean industry is. I know that there's been some really interesting work, particularly by Dr. Sherry Scully, on what people think about and what students think about the ocean sector. And pretty much people still think it's fishing. And the reality is that the ocean sector is so much more than that. And that's sort of the fascinating part to me, is it's a massively growing industry. I like to call it my $1.5 trillion niche industry. And we are in desperate need of more people to participate in the ocean industry. Mm-hmm. And the public perception is really quite challenging for the ocean sector. And I think that's paired with an internal reticence as well, to be honest, which is that it is a very long-standing industry. So that base industry of extraction that we have in the ocean sector is a very traditional industry. It's an industry that's handed down through families. We do things the same way that we've been doing things for the last, 800 years in Newfoundland. And so sometimes it can be difficult to change an internal culture of an industry as well. But I do think we're absolutely turning the corner. And I think that that's a huge thanks to a generational change in the industry, and also with the new technologies that are coming in industry. Like, data is a huge part of the ocean sector now. And so it's a different perspective when you have someone who's gone through computer science, who's thinking about how they're going to engage in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Great points. Anne-Marie, I'd like to know, from your national perspective, working across the sectors, what are the most compelling cultural and business benefits you've seen when organizations truly commit to EDI?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you so much, Kes, for these introductory remarks and setting such a good context for today's conversation. I am actually joining you all from Treaty 7 territory in Calgary, and also the home to the Métis Districts 5 and 6. So just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that and to thank Indigenous people for the privilege of working, learning, and living in this space. Kes, you provided some really good, information about the business case already, and maybe I can add a few more to that. So the business case, both from a, organizational perspective, a benefits, but also a cultural perspective. One important factor when we talk about immigration, which I think is a significant shift over the last, number of years, is that we definitely have more immigrants coming to Canada, and we have more Canadians who are first generations immigrants. But those immigrants, the top sources of immigration to Canada over the last number of years have all come from Asia, China, India, and the Philippines, which is vastly different from the immigration patterns that we saw, let's say 50 years ago, 100 years ago, which were primarily from Europe and like the US, right? So lots of changes, and that speaks to a need for us, as a society, to evolve our understanding of cultural diversity, building a stronger cultural intelligence into the work that we do, and a lot of cultural humility, so that we don't always think about Canada is the static culture, because it is constantly evolving. And if we're trying to attract the best talent, right? And more than half of all of the immigrants who come to Canada are economic immigrants, which means that they bring a lot of talents and skills to Canada. We want to be able to be well positioned as an employer, as a workplace, as colleagues, as clients, or maybe these are our, customers, right? To be adaptable and to evolve the way in which we work with other people. So I think that's a very big piece as well. And to add a couple of other interesting points, inclusion is really important. And when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, feeling included as rated by employees really increase people's efforts and engagement in the workplace. So feelings of inclusion, according to research, accounts for 20% of an employee's desire to stay at their organizations. And high feelings of belonging, which are associated with feelings of inclusion, correspond to 50% less turnover, a 56% performance increase, and a 75% decrease in the use of sick days. And one more thing about building a culture of inclusion is that 92% of employees want to see their CEO or their most senior leaders speak about diversity and issues of equality. And leadership really, they want to work hard to be able to be very clear about what DEI&A is and what it isn't, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of pushback when people are reading particular, media sources, right, and not really looking at it through a lens of critical analysis. So there's 3 points that I'll just wrap up with, which I have shared in the past as well. DEI&A, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, does not lower standards. It lowers barriers to equal opportunities. DEI&A does not give unfair advantage. It reduces unfair practices. And DEI&A was never a threat. It has always been a distinctive strength. So when your leaders are able to really clearly articulate, the business and social and people imperative for this work, I think that they will find that, the culture will be improved. People will join on that collective vision, and you will see some positive changes in terms of the culture, which will lead to better outcomes in terms of systems, policies, and processes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I love when you talked about the culture of inclusion, because I think it's so important. I think that's what we want to do, is create that culture from the top down and bottom up. So thank you very much for that. Natasha, a question for you. What strategies have you found the most effective in gaining buy-in from senior leadership and decision makers when you're integrating EDI&A into culture and policy?
Amazing. Can everyone hear me? I'm off mute. Yeah, perfect. Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you. So Karen, thank you so much for that question. Before I dive into my response, I just want to also say thank you so much, Cass, for those opening remarks. That completely reframed or changed the way I'm going to address or come to keynotes. I love how interactive that was. So thank you so much for bringing Slido into the space. It was a lot of fun. And then Anne-Marie, of course, thank you so much for your response. I'm a huge fan of slam poetry, and I found myself snapping as you were speaking. So thank you so much for everything that you shared, as well as, of course, the resources that you've made available to everyone. Okay, so with respect to strategies for gaining buy-in, I actually really like this question, because I think it's really all about, well, for me, it's really all about leveraging the business case in the most accessible and inclusive way possible. So what do I mean by that? Well, just to start, at this stage in EDI&A work, the data, as Cass has alluded to, as Anne-Marie has doubled down on, it really does speak for itself. Yes, of course, there's absolutely that moral imperative to building more equitable and inclusive organizations. But beyond that, we now have, as Cass mentioned, research since the 90s, decades of research that's really showcasing and showing how EDI&A drives real business outcomes. So for me, when it comes to gaining buy-in from senior leadership or, from a cross-functional group of decision makers, what's so important to remember for me, and what I would implore you all to consider, is that leadership team, that group of decision makers, they're not a homogenous group. Every leader, let's look at leaders. Every leader within that group is actually responsible for a different part or aspect of the business. So my strategy when it comes to gaining their buy-in is really about adapting the way that I talk about EDI&A based on who I'm speaking to. So let me show you, or let me just unpack what that looks like in practice. If I'm, for example, speaking to a chief people officer, now that person, they're going to be caring about things like retention and employee engagement. They're going to want to know that organizations with more inclusive cultures, that they have 22% lower turnover rates and that they have much higher employee satisfaction. And that in turn really saves real dollars on things like recruitment and onboarding costs, just to name a few. Now, on the other hand, if I was talking to a chief operating officer, they're focused on productivity and efficiency. So in those conversations, I'm spending time bringing forward data that shows how inclusive teams really outperform less diverse teams, as Cass mentioned, up to 36%. And they're doing this because, while psychological safety and diverse thinking really does lead to faster problem solving and much better operational outcomes. I'll give one other final example. If I'm speaking to a chief technology officer, during that conversation, I'm going to spend my time highlighting the fact that diverse and inclusive teams, they are much more innovative. They produce more patents, they produce better products, and they're just better equipped to navigate this super complex, fast-changing environment and world that we're all living in today. Now, in those circumstances, when I'm sitting at a leadership table with all the leaders, or if I'm sitting at a table with a cross-functional group of decision makers, in those situations, I am taking a more holistic approach. And I'm spending that time really being methodical and unpacking the full business case for EDI&A, things as we just discussed: better recruitment, higher retention, stronger innovation. We've discussed quite a few of them actually during this conversation, so I won't go ahead and list all of them, but the business case has already been made. And so just to sort of wrap up everything that I was saying, the real key to my strategy is meeting leaders and decision makers where they are. I spend the time really intentionally connecting EDI&A efforts directly to the specific objectives and the concerns of individual leaders and individual decision makers, and spending that time to really demonstrate how inclusion and how equity are really essential components for them to achieve their outcomes.
Thank you for that. And I think that's such a powerful statement when you say you meet people where they are. We do that a lot with the work that I do, and it's about including people in the conversation and helping them steer the direction they need to go. So thank you very much for that. Excuse me. I have a question that I'm going to put out to the entire panel to start a conversation. For those who say they lack the time or resources to prioritize EDI&A, what's your response? And what's one small step people can take? So Cass, can I start with you for that? And then we'll move through the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand that entirely. As a parent, as someone who was running a small business and growing a small business, it always feels like you don't have the time. But I liken it to making your lunches on Sunday, to be honest, right? Like if you put the work in up front, your whole week is better, right? Like if I make my lunches on Sunday, I will have lunch. If I don't make my lunches on Sunday, I will not have lunch. And so if you do a little bit of work up front, your whole week is better. And so to me, that is really trying to find and to build on Natasha. Like I thought that was a great, meet people where they're at. Find something. Did you go to university to make your life easier, right? Like, did you make sure your car was maintained so it ran better, right? All that kind of stuff that you have to do to be a human in the world. You got to do that with work too. You've got to do that with your team in order to save you the problems down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Natasha, do you want to add anything to that? Or, sorry, Anne-Marie?
I'm happy to piggyback off of
Yes.
what Cass was sharing. I so echo your sentiments, Cass. The reason I giggled when the question was first asked is because what I find personally is, whenever someone tells me that they don't have the time or the resources to really prioritize EDI&A, my first response is always, well, like, what cost are you already paying by not prioritizing it? Are you paying the cost of high turnover? Are you paying the cost of disengaged teams? Are you missing out on innovation altogether? Those things are already costing you. It's costing you time. It's costing you money. It's costing you your talent. And so, as I sort of mentioned earlier, EDI&A, it's no longer just this moral imperative or another nice to have. It's honestly absolutely about building a stronger, more resilient organization. And in terms of what's one small step that people can take in order to really start this journey, because you're never really fully arrived at EDI&A. It's this lifelong journey that you're on. But for me, whenever I'm talking to organizations about, taking that one first small step, I always say that the single most impactful step that they can take is about investing in their leadership. I'm really of the firm belief that an organization can't evolve past the mindset of its leaders. And so leadership training that's focused on building real capacity around inclusion, around equity and accessibility, I think is so key. Because, when they actually understand the business case, when they see EDI&A as essential to success, they're so much more likely to allocate the resources and allocate the time and then the focus that's needed. And that tone really does have to be set from the top.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's wonderful. Really well said, Natasha. And I love the conversation about, really engaging the leaders at the top. I would add to that, DEIA work is really about the people, right? It should be human-centric work in your workplace, meaning that, we often hear, people as your biggest asset, right? Well, that's true. They are your biggest assets, but more than that, they are also people. They are people who bring a rich and diverse set of dimensions of diversity experiences that can really enhance your workplace. But if they're not able to bring all of who they are and what they can contribute to the workplace, then they will shut down. You will maybe experience presenteeism, which is they show up at work, but they're not really connected and engaged, right? So I would say if you don't have that much time, but you realize that you do care about your people, which should be every organization's role is to care for their people, then to complement what Natasha and Kes are saying, get to know your team, right? Meet with your colleagues. It can be as simple as having tea time or coffee time with them and try to generally ask them how they're doing, demonstrate you care for them, open up first and show your humility, your curiosity, share a little bit about who you are as a person and what matters to you in terms of like a vision for an inclusive workplace, right? Once you hear from those folks, you will get a better sense of what's working in the workplace. And I really encourage you to listen to all people from all levels of the organization and also listen to those people who push back on DEIA. So not just the people who want more DEIA, but also those who maybe have other concerns and they don't necessarily support this work. Hear from all of them. And that way you have some tangible information that you can share at a high level with the leadership team. This is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm observing. And to Natasha's point, then, develop capacity for your leadership team to really understand the power of DIA when done right and the role and responsibilities of leadership. And coming out of that, hopefully, then the leaders will say, okay, we're going to prioritize this. We're going to actually make time for it. And we're going to build a budget, resources, a good plan. And, that could include doing a more formal employee survey. It could mean focus groups. It could mean reviewing your HR policies and practices and really looking at what you can change at the systemic level so that, if your top leader, champion of DIA were to leave the organization, some changes will have been made already at the systemic level so that it's not dependent on one person, but it's embedded throughout your organization.
Thank you for that. And I think that's following the theme of what I'm hearing you all saying is that whole creating the culture and creating that safe space for people to find what's working for them with EDI&A. I have one last question before we move to Q&A, and this is also for the whole group. So Anne-Marie, you're up. Maybe I'll start with you on this one. If we get it right, so if we truly embed EDI&A across the ocean sector, what does success look like in 10 years?
I really love this question. And I was thinking about it, and I would say, you know, as DIA practitioners, we will look back at 2025, so this year, as a year of deep self-reflection and growth. And when or while some of us may feel like DEI is breaking down, in fact, I think with this hard work and self-reflection and this kind of dialogue that we're having today, I think that we will be moving from a breaking down to a breaking through. And I think it's breaking through a difficult time to learn from the lessons of this generation so that we can continue to advance this critical work. And the vision 10 years from now is our workplaces, leaders, employees, community partners, clients, vendors, suppliers who are more understanding and championing the value of diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusion, belonging, and justice and fairness for all. And it will show up in a workplace that is more culturally curious, engaged, where people don't avoid each other because they're different, but actually have the courage to meet each other, to learn and celebrate their similarities and differences, and where workplaces can truly leverage the power of diversity of thoughts, diversity of education, diversity of ideas and experiences in order to make better decisions, be more innovative, and create really good, sustainable impacts.
Thank you very much. Natasha, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, I absolutely love everything you've just shared, especially the piece about, you know, breaking down to break through. I feel like that parallels my life and the themes of my life, so to speak. So thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, so what I actually just love about this question itself is it just showcases the diversity of thought in this room, because I approached it in an entirely different way. So in the way that I was thinking about it. So the question is about really just, you know, what does success look like in 10 years? And so if we get this right. And so the way that I was seeing it was that, you know, if we get this right, like, it won't just be about what we see, you know. Of course, yes, we're going to see organizations that actually reflect, you know, the diversity of the communities, of the coastlines, and of the industries that they serve. And, you know, in the ocean sector, that definitely means companies and research teams and leadership tables. You know, they're going to be including Indigenous knowledge holders, women, newcomers, young people, and otherwise just historically underrepresented voices. And those voices will be at the table then participating in the future of the blue economy. But as I mentioned, it's really also just beyond what it looks like. You know, so if we get this truly right in 10 years, it goes beyond even what it looks like. And for me, success is measured by how it feels. You know, it's going to feel like belonging. It's going to feel like psychological safety. It's going to feel like people at every level, that they know that their contributions are valued and that they're respected. And I know that might sound fluffy, but that's all measurable too. So, you know, organizations, you can track inclusion sentiment over time. You can do this by asking your employees, you know, as Anne-Marie had mentioned, surveying your employees. You know, you can ask them questions like, you know, do you feel safe here? Do you feel heard here? Do you feel you have a future here? And when you can really answer yes across all different identities, that's when you really know that your EDI&A isn't just a program within your organization, that you've actually that success is there because it's become the culture. And so, yeah, I just love the idea of also framing it or looking at success from not just how it looks, but also how it's going to feel.
Thank you. And that's, I actually love that the two different perspectives that are saying the same thing, that it's just so important that we see that growth. So thank you for that. Cass, can you close us out in that question?
Yes. I'm going to bring an entirely different perspective. I just want to say you guys are better people than I am, because for me, I'm very mercenary about this. I see that as a marine ecologist, we are facing an existential crisis in the ocean right now. And so to me, the value of diversity, and in 10 years, if we are successful in this, it will mean all hands on deck and amazing ability to save the ocean. That's where I'm at. Like, it's really mercenary for me. Like, let's just save the world. Let's do that. That's what I would like to see us do. And yeah, all that other stuff would be great too. I'd love people to feel good and be happy and like their workplaces, but I would also just straight up like us to save the ocean.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you all so much for that. I think now we're just about the mark. We're going to open the Q&A, and I will pass it back to Natalie and the team.
Right. Thanks so much, Karen, Natasha, Anne-Marie, Cass. That was all wonderful. And as Karen said, I'm going to open the floor to questions. So if you have a question, please put up your hand or put a message in the chat box. We had one come through while you were talking, so we'll start with that to give everybody a moment to think of their own questions if they haven't. So what did come through, I think this came when you were talking, Natasha, but anyone from the panel is open to answer. Are there any suggestions for training for senior leaders that we could recommend?
Yeah, and I'm gonna plug my organization because they offer this fantastic. So the organization that I work at is called Culture Ally, full service DEI consulting firm. We do everything from consulting, training, e-learning. And one of the programs or the trainings that we actually offer at Culture Ally that I found to work just wonders for the senior leadership level is inclusive leadership. And so it consists of really unpacking for the foundational things that you need to understand as it relates to not only DEI, but how to apply the principles and practice of DEI. So for example, like really understanding what cultural competency is from a theoretical level, but then also how to be culturally competent and what those actions look like. And so it's definitely one of those programs that I recommend to any senior leadership team that is looking to sort of build their capacity and become a more inclusive leader.
That's great, Natasha. And certainly the inclusive leadership training is so important for leaders. And when it's done right, the leaders finally have this safe space where they can have honest conversations, ask really tough questions in their mind that, how do I approach this particular situation? How do I show up as a leader? What is the good language to use? Because language is always evolving, right? And how do I avoid the landmines? Or if there's one in front of me, how do I address it? These are really hard questions. And I think leaders really need help to navigate those so that they can show up with a little bit more confidence into conversations where, there's a lot of gray areas and they don't know what to expect. So I think the training is really important. I would also add, if you go to our website at ccdi.ca, we also have a ton of free resources, reports, commemoration guides, toolkits that really help people to have a deeper understanding of people. Various groups of people, what are their needs and priorities, where you can find out more information. Let's say, if you wanted to learn about anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or anti-Black racism, for example, we have materials about those. So take some time to do that. And for employers who want to become employer partner of CCDI, we have over 700 employer partners across Canada in all sectors and all industries. to just, by becoming an employee partner, you also have access to more webinars and our community of practice events, as well as our brand new virtual community hub, which is a place where leaders can come together to actually talk directly with each other, to support each other in their work. So there's, organizations like Natasha's and mine and many, many others are out there to really help, companies to have those deeper conversations, to really learn together and feel supported on their journey to becoming a more inclusive and equitable workplace.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other thoughts on that one from Karen or Kes? Awesome. Okay, the floor is open if anybody has any other questions. Oh, yes, go ahead.
I have a question for Natasha, and it is about the legal side of things. There was a very famous, in my world, court case in 2013 where a bunch of female scientists sued the federal government for discrimination with regards to Canada research chairs, and it was successful, and universities got told to shape up or ship out. And I cite that all the time is to try and convince people to take action. So one thing we haven't talked about today, you talked about the costs that are out there already, but one of my questions is, do you use the risks as a way to convince people to take action? Particularly senior leaders, I find, can be very concerned about risks. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. It's funny because it actually gets to the reason why I left law and actually pursued DEI as a consulting was because I spent so much of my own personal time just unpacking the risks associated with non-compliance, for example, with anti-discrimination laws. And then what I did find is that it was actually it was successful in moving the needle to a certain extent. So what I found is that it helped to bring people to sort of equity, but then it kind of, if they already needed to be convinced to get to that line, the opportunity for inclusion was like, it took a lot of time to then really help them to understand how not only is this about like mitigating risk, but it's also about unleashing and untapping potential. And so I was really, me personally, I was fatigued by forcing organizations to do things because they were at risk, legal risk if they didn't comply. And then I found myself really wanting to work with organizations and leaders that really already understood the business case and not even just the business case, the moral imperative as well. They just needed help to figure out how to go about achieving it. But having said all of that, yes, there's a particular type of client that identifying and highlighting the risks definitely is the first way or the easiest step into the door, because of course there are, and then it's not just anti-discrimination now, there's accessibility, there's laws related to accessibility and making sure that you have proper plans in place for that as well. There's a number of different laws that support the type of work that we do in the DEI space. And so especially for organizations that are having a harder time being bought in, yes, I will definitely highlight some of the risks associated, should they not at least bring their levels up to what is required by law and what I would argue is equity. Yeah, so those are some of my thoughts. About that.
So helpful because your point about there's kind of two groups of organizations when you're dealing with this. One that you can get buy-in for the benefits, and then there's the group that you're just bringing up, right? And yeah. I think understanding which group you're talking to, back to your earlier points, meet people where they're at. Some people are only going to get here, right? That's the only place they're going to get. And some groups you're going to be able to really engage them in the conversation. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
Diana, I see a hand up.
Hey, can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, Culture Ally does rock because what I wanted to do, I didn't really want to ask a question, but I really wanted to appreciate to give kudos and appreciate these webinars and these forums, because I think that Natasha knows, but I'm in the United States where saying DEI is almost like condemning somebody to a slow death. So, and people believe it is the biggest negative flex that you can give someone is to call someone a DEI candidate or a DEI hire. And what I found when I was working at the Pentagon was the most ardent opponents didn't really understand what it was until, I had to like break it down to, and then when I went after the election, I went to Toronto, and it was completely different. But because it was, DEI is just part of the fabric of business strategy and everything. So when I said to people, and when I was facilitating, because I was hired as a contractor to, before the new current administration was there, was present, I just broke it down. I broke it down to money, and I said to people, I said, well, what is your, I asked everyone when I was facilitating the training, what is your bottom line in an organization? And the bottom line for any organization this is how I said it, the bottom line for any organization or any company on this earth is to make money. Now, DEI winds up being, or diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, belonging, and learning. All of that falls under the category of maximizing your profit through representation. And they were like, okay, well, tell me some more. Okay, well, sit down. I got a couple minutes for you. So then, it's like really engaging in the conversation with people. And it's difficult to do right now. That's why I'm so appreciative of this, because it's giving me even more tools to work with, so that I can say, okay, okay, well, let me break it down to you this way. Just making sure that, people are not quick to say, well, she's a DEI hire. And I come back with a, retort and be like, well, how old are you? I'm 60. You're a DEI hire too.
That's right.
You can't hear out of one ear. Oh, you're a DEI hire too. So, I appreciate this, and thank you so much. And Culturale still rocks. So.
Thanks, Diana.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for one more hand. Lori, if you want to go ahead, I see your hand there.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I appreciate sort of the different angles that folks are presenting from, whether they're, enhancing the ocean industry through DEI or offering services. So that's been a really cool perspective. Talking about the risk, talking about the American experience and other global experiences. I'm curious to know from these different perspectives if some of the panelists could share, like, what are the current barriers that people are bringing forward and asking about. If you don't mind sharing that, would be helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean barriers? Or
Barriers
businesses
to,
adapting this, or
embracing DEI, barriers to expanding or if you're having conversation and they're, oh, we could, but,
yeah,
or we are doing it and these are the things that are keeping us up at night because it's not working. Just sort of anything, like we've had a great conversation about what we can do and how to include it. I'm just wondering, not to like focus on negative, but to look at what are folks facing for challenges, and so I can kind of brainstorm that piece. Thank you.
Maybe I can have I can share a couple of barriers, and I invite my colleagues to share more. One of the barriers that really I've heard, especially from a number of our employee partners who have operations in the US, is what is our position in Canada in relation to the US? Because we're saying one thing, or maybe we intentionally decide not to say much of anything in the US because we don't want to be sued or, attract negative attention. But in Canada, it's a different atmosphere. It's a different climate, as you mentioned, Diana, when you travel to Toronto. So they're trying to navigate that space, and it's not clear because there's no precedence. And so how do they show up in that space? What is the Canadian culture? What is the Canadian expectations? You are seeing, unfortunately, a number of companies who are, going really quiet on DEI commitment right now in Canada, but you're also seeing more companies who are supportive of DEI in Canada than those, I think, who are more quiet. Today is election day. Let's see what happens tomorrow, right? I think huge. Like, I think that's a huge elephant in the room in terms of like what is the state of DEI support in Canada, from all the way to the top of our political leaders. So that's one. And then the second one is the economic uncertainty has made it really challenging for some of the leaders to say, can I really commit to DEI? Can I really invest in that when there could be a recession coming up, when, my market is being impacted? You talked about, lower productivity, Cass, earlier. It's a real economic challenge for a lot of workplaces, and they're struggling to figure out, where DI fits into that order of priorities. And to Natasha's point, and the business case that we shared earlier, there is a business case. It's really important to prioritize, but some of those leaders haven't heard those messages, and so they're really struggling to whether or not they want to continue to invest or start to invest in DIA.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of actually what Anne-Marie said, and in fact, it speaks so much to what I wanted to share or to draw your attention to. And in fact, actually, I think Diana just mentioned it in the chat. So, so I actually am responsible for quite a bit of the American portfolio within the organization that I work for, and so what I'm seeing is this fear associated with, continuing the work in the same way that we were doing the work, but yet this strong and steadfast commitment to continuing it in some way because they were already able to realize the benefits of it. And so what that looks like is we are seeing quite a bit of rebranding or, changing the name of the program, especially if you're an organization that receives federal funding. You are within a spotlight, you're a pretty bright and glaring spotlight. And so you want to be able to, of course, protect your staff, your employees, your community partners, but then at the same time, still moving forward on your commitments because you have already seen and experienced the benefits of the work. And so we are seeing organizations remove, especially the organizations that are within the states, removing, pieces of the acronym. They're moving, for example, removing D and the E. Those are more considered, ironically, equity is considered controversial in some respects, but, but they're focusing in on the I, inclusion, and then they're adding to that, inclusion and belonging and or accessibility. And so they're just looking at ways to essentially rebrand so that they're able to stay on track with their commitments and in fact expand further, but then not draw the ire of, particular stakeholders that might want to see that work be stunted or stopped. And so, in fact, actually what I'm seeing in addition to, so I'm seeing organizations change their names because they really, or change the name of their program because they really want to protect the progress that's been made to date and they want to still continue on. But then what I've also seen that's been really interesting, and I almost want to, I'm starting to think about ways that we could start to adapt this in this market here, is I'm seeing organizations now add an additional pillar to their strategy where, previously to this change in administration and this new political landscape that we're in, a lot of their work was internal facing. They were really looking at how to how to button up, how to clean up shop, so that way they could be the models of, they could model inclusive behavior and inclusive organizational practices. But now what I'm also seeing is that they're expanding their strategies to be outward facing. So not just looking at, inclusive vendor practices, for example, but they're building coalitions with other like-minded organizations and looking at ways that they can start impacting policy. I mean, it's gone to that level where it's almost like all hands on deck. We've got to fight for what we believe in. And there's a number of ways that we can really get to this or play a part on this battlefield. And so I think it's really fantastic to see organizations be really, really innovative in the way that they're not only protecting what they have, but then also advocating for the values in the world that they ultimately want to see. And they know that there's so much power in business and organization, and they're starting to put those two pieces together, which I found was really, really interesting. And I've had just the absolute pleasure of being a part of. So those are some of the insights that I can share about some of the challenges that I'm currently seeing. One thing I can say as just a way to button that up is if you are within an organization that wants to change or wants to, adapt to the current climate by, for example, changing or rebranding, what I do recommend is that you are as transparent as possible with your employees, with your community, because without that clear understanding as to really why we're doing what we're doing, a lot of people feel or can fear that there's going to be a lack of commitment or there's going to be a step back. In fact, they don't really understand. They won't be able to understand why and how this is actually like promoting DEI or how this is protecting their progress. And so really that transparent communication is extremely important and something that I highly recommend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And my question was made us go over time, so I apologize, but that was excellent. And I love that idea and to hear that organizations are reaching out to each other to collaborate, because I would assume that would reduce some of that fear. So that's excellent. Thank you.
All right. Well, yes, we're a couple minutes over time. I'm so glad everybody stayed. You can that shows us what a good conversation we're having. So I want to thank you again to Anne-Marie, to Kes, to Karen, to Natasha. Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. And thanks to everyone who attended. We'll hope to see you all in the next Ocean Allies webinar. Thank you and have a good day.